Geeks and Geekettes, once again, it's Wednesday morning. Time for another Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a working comic book professional, about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Before we get to the questions, let me just remind you that First Kill, a Rambo graphic novel from Splato Comics, written by me and fledgling comic book writer Sylvester Stallone, is still in demand. It's still available. The link will be below in comments. This is a graphic novel from Splato Comics with awesome artwork. It's a true balls-to-the-wall Vietnam War adventure depicting John Rambo's first tour in Indochina. And if you're a war comic fan or a Sylvester Stallone fan or a Rambo fan or all three, you need to check it out. And it's still available in demand. Okay, Paulo Panganaban. Oh man, I should practice these beforehand. I'd probably still get them wrong. My apologies in advance. In a previous video, you mentioned how you didn't like or refused to use sentimentality in a story due to it being manipulative. What are some examples you can give that demonstrate just how bad it is? Asking because I've noticed something that sounds similar to this in certain modern anime, where an average okay show is somehow praised to high heaven as a masterpiece, all because of one emotion-inducing scene or episode. Well, every movie or every story should have some level of emotional catharsis. It should draw you in and touch you in some way. You know, make you laugh, make you cry, surprise you, thrill you, have you on the edge of your seat, make you hate the bad guy, make you love the two people who fall in love, whatever. And you're experiencing some of the emotional changes that the characters are going through. I mean, this is part of storytelling, and all that's fine. The problem is when you introduce sentiment for absolutely no reason. If you're old enough to recall, and maybe they still do this on network television. I haven't watched network television in 20 years, but they would have a situation comedy and it was all gags and jokes and ho, ho, ho. And then around ratings time, they would have a very special episode. They would announce that this was a very special episode. And what that meant was that they were going to introduce some degree of sentimentality or tragedy to what would normally be a purely escapist, silly situation comedy. And they could do this because once the series had been around for a season or two, you were fully invested in the characters. You know, if you were still watching these shows, it meant that you liked these characters. You liked visiting with them each week. And you, in addition to liking them, you began to care about them. And so suddenly, in what was normally a hokey-jokey show, you know, someone dies or gets sick, or there's an accident, or someone's going to leave, you know, to go to college or whatever. And all of a sudden, you're all of this investment you have in the characters is now being misused by the creators. Instead of making you laugh, they're going to make you get you upset, scare you, make you cry, and make you get sentimental about the characters that, you know, you've come to enjoy. And this is the purest example of manipulation I can think of, is getting your reader, viewer, whatever, invested in the characters and then misusing that investment to, you know, torture them emotionally. The king of this is Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg and John Williams together, they work in tandem to bring schmaltz to almost every project they work on. I mean, they you know, idiotic movies like E.T. will be tear-inducing because they're working the camera, they're working all of this stuff, and the music. The music plays a big part in this. Manipulate you, you know, major chords, minor chords. They really do work on your emotions, whether you realize it or not. It's highly subliminal what they're doing to you. And so Spielberg is guilty of this more than just about anybody. You know, to get you invested in these characters by making them oh so cute and oh so adorable, and then having, you know, tragedy befall them or some crisis or whatever, and then you're like all weepy, and and in this one, E.T. in particular, it's probably the high watermark or the high teardrop mark of Spielberg's work. That just mawkishly sentimental. I mean, it's like the ending of Close Encounters of the Third Kind wasn't smarmy enough. He had to make a whole new movie to reach new levels of smarm in this 80s classic that's possibly one of the most forgettable movies ever made. What's the difference between emotional catharsis and sentimentality? Well, it's a fine line, and generally it doesn't involve swelling music to make you feel emotions that normally you wouldn't feel if you were just watching the characters interplay. To me, every movie particularly should end with some level of emotional catharsis, even comedies. Some level that you've been brought to a place emotionally and left there. And it's either satisfactory or or like Casablanca or Chinatown, or it's satisfactory like most comedies. They tie up all the loose ends at the end, and everybody feels good about everything, and you leave the theater feeling good. Or films like Casablanca, where you leave feeling unrequited. And why do you feel unrequited? Because Rick and Ilsa are unrequited. I mean, the movie does its job perfectly, but without sentiment. There's no, this is a very tragic scene at the end, but they don't manipulate you with music or camera pans or slow roll-ups from a low angle, like a certain director I mentioned before uses constantly. And, it's good stuff. You need that catharsis. I mean, that's why revenge movies are so popular, because, they build up a successful revenge film builds up a rancor for the bad guy that is then relieved by, him getting his in the end, ideally. And I remember seeing a movie called Revenge with Kevin Costner. And I saw it in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, with a largely migrant worker population or audience. And my wife and I were one of the few, English speakers in the audience. And this film was set in Mexico, and it was this, revenge story in which at the end there is no revenge. And the audience was so angry they were standing up and shouting at the screen because the bad guy didn't get it in the end. For some reason, they made a movie called Revenge that was free of revenge in its third act. And so I guess there was a level of emotional catharsis in there. The emotion was frustration. This audience was pissed, and I didn't blame them. I mean, my wife still gets livid if I ever mention this movie to her, because, everybody was frustrated that they built up Anthony Quinn as like a total scumbag. This is a total abuser, just a horrible, horrible person. And then he just gets off scot-free. But emotional catharsis can be anything. It can be the best emotional catharsis at the end of a film is a scene which casts you back through the rest of the movie, so that you realize, hey, I didn't quite understand what I was seeing before. Movies like The Sixth Sense or The Usual Suspects, or one of my favorites, Citizen Kane is a classic emotional catharsis ending where the catharsis is your memory suddenly, you suddenly remember the whole film, and now you're replaying the film in your mind from a new perspective because you've been given information you didn't have before. The Conversation is one of my favorites that has this scene where it puts into doubt everything you've seen up to that point of that scene, and it makes you go backwards. Empire Strikes Back, the Luke, I am your father scene does the same thing. These are brilliant uses of emotional catharsis, rather than just pure mawkish sentiment for the sake of sentiment, just pulling stuff out of nowhere to make you sad or drippy or whatever, clutching your pearls. And but sometimes the cheap, tawdry ending is the way Hollywood wants to go because they love that stuff. And I guess audiences love it too, because a lot of these films I showed you that have, teary, drippy, sentimental endings were huge hits. and many of them considered classics to this day. But I prefer emotional catharsis without sentiment over, sitting, through a too hanky movie. Okay, Dwayne Thomas, do you like audiobooks? A female friend of mine loves them, in large part because she's so busy, and only time she's not engaged in doing something else is when she's driving alone. Listening to an audiobook fills up and occupies what would otherwise be a boring drive, and allows her to experience books for which she otherwise wouldn't have the time. I, on the other hand, have never warmed up to audiobooks. I need to read the words. Yeah, I used to, when we lived in a really rural part of Pennsylvania, it was a long drive to the market, the supermarket. So, every couple of weeks, I'd have to take this long drive, sometimes with the kids. And audiobooks helped. And they helped me because they distracted me from the long, boring drive. And I think they helped the kids because they built their vocabulary. Because I was generally, I was on a P.G. Woodhouse jag, and I was listening to a lot of P.G. Woodhouse because quite aptly, P.G. Woodhouse is very PG, so the kids can listen to it. They're not going to hear any, cussing or any nastiness. So yeah, I kind of got in the habit of listening to audiobooks, and this is back when they were on tape. You could rent them. You could rent them from, audio tape houses. And I got in the habit, and I guess it's maybe a bad habit because I still listen to audiobooks when I go to sleep at night. Well, I fall asleep to an audiobook. It's probably a terrible, terrible habit. Probably trains me that whenever I hear an audiobook, I'm going to doze off. Much like reading a book at bedtime will train you to fall asleep while reading. But generally, if I'm listening to an audiobook while sleeping, I can't listen to a book I've never read. So I have the benefit of I've read all of the books that I have in my audiobook files. And particular favorites are George MacDonald Fraser, Richard Stark, a good Sven Hassel, Nazis killing Soviets kind of book. And of course, again, P.G. Woodhouse. So, and the reason I listen to it only if I knew the story is because when you listen to an audiobook as a bedtime activity, and it's a new book, you're going to lose the story. You're going to lose the story entirely, unless it's a Western. So I listen to books that I already know and love. And even if I get lost or forget or don't realize where I left off because I fell asleep, I already know the story. I can even skip ahead to my favorite parts. And for the most part, somebody mentioned this. So I read an article recently, within the last couple of years, that said, if you don't have a lot of time to read on your hands, read a good book, even if you're not going to finish it, because at least you're exposed to some good writing. Or just pick up an old favorite and reread it, and then start anywhere and reread it. And that, for me, is what these audiobooks accomplish. I get to hear the language. I get to hear the writing. And I enjoy it, even if I don't listen to the whole book at one time or even finish listening to the book. It's like revisiting an old friend to me. I don't listen to them much in the car because I live in Central Florida, which has turned into Long Island since I moved here. So nothing is far away. Nothing is far enough away for me to get engaged in an audiobook while I'm driving there. But if I make a run down to Sarasota or someplace like that, I might put on an audiobook. So there you go. That's all you need to know about me and audiobooks. Too much information. Ophi, or Ofe. What comic book do you think you have been asked to sign the most? Well, Robin, the first Robin miniseries, I signed a ton of these, both at store appearances and for Home Shopping Network. For a while there, I was making more money signing comics than I was writing comics. So I would sign for Home Shopping Network and what's the other one? I can't remember the other one. And I appeared a couple of times on Home Shopping Network because their headquarters was only 45 minutes from my house, and they would send a limo, and it was wonderful. And but I signed literally if I've signed less than 50,000 of these over the past 30 years, I'd be stunned. But yeah, signed a lot of them. Also signed a lot of the #1 of Robin's monthly, when the monthly comic started, as well as Nightwing #1, and of course Vengeance of Bane. And all of these I signed for the different shopping outfits, television shopping outfits. But I think the granddaddy, the king, the biggest one of all the ones I've signed, is Punisher Warzone #1. And it's generally signed. This was a cutaway cover. The title was die cut out of the cover and printed on actually the first page of the comic. And so often you'll find my signature on the inside, below the Punisher Warzone logo. And I signed, I don't know how, untold thousands of these for the online or on TV shopping channels. And I sign them every time I go to a store appearance or convention. People mail them to me to be signed. I often joke that if you have one that's not signed, it's probably rarer than one that is signed. That's probably not true because this book sold 3.5 million copies. So I don't think I'm anywhere near signing everyone in existence. But there's a hint for you. Don't overpay for this as a back issue, because there's literally millions of them out there. This is not by any means a rare comic. So yeah, that was an interesting question. Very, very geeky, but I like very, very geeky because I am very, very geeky. Joshua Ignatowski. During your time as a writer for Batman, how were you able to write new story arcs for such an iconic character who had been around for so many years without falling into either ditch of, 1, causing the character to change too much from his iconic self, or 2, making the character experience so little that the story felt static? Well, that's the challenge of taking on an iconic character, like Batman or Superman or Spider-Man or Wolverine or whoever you take on, Sherlock Holmes, Tarzan. The list goes on and on. And what are you going to bring to the title? What are you going to bring to the character? I never thought of changing the character to suit my needs or changing the character to put my mark on it. I feel that when you take on a character like this, particularly if you're doing a monthly book, you are entrusted to shepherd this character. You are a steward for this character. You're taking care of it for the next team of writers who take over after you've left the title. So you have to be very aware of that. These are very, very valuable properties, very, very valuable franchises, and you don't want to go messing around with them too much, because more than putting your mark on it, sometimes you put your stink on it. Like the writer who thought that he would include incontinency as part of Batman's origin. That's going to follow that writer to the end of his days, if I have anything to do with it. So yeah, you don't want to go changing the character a lot. But that doesn't mean you can't explore aspects of the character that already exist. And my favorite, of course, is exploring the logistics, particularly of a character like Batman. How exactly does his life work? How does he make that happen? When does he sleep? The Batmobile raises question after question about its very existence. The rest of his gadgets and conveyances and what's Bruce Wayne's day-to-day life like? Things like these that can be explored as part of a larger story. These aspects brought forth to help make the character seem more real. That's what I like. And by doing that, you're not really changing anything. You're enhancing the character rather than changing it. You're answering the imponderable questions about the character, which is basically the Superman comics from like 1955, 1965. All they did was answer questions about Superman. How does he cut his hair? Where does Clark Kent get his glasses? They never did a story about that, unfortunately. But the most important thing and the hardest thing, the real heavy lifting, to me, is to not make the comics all about the character all the time, which a lot of writers tend to do, but to come up with really solid action stories and place the character in them. I think that's why The Punisher is so easy for me to write, because he's so easy to insert into almost any chaotic situation, which he goes on to make more chaotic. In the case of Batman, he lives in this kind of, crime-ridden fantasy town, like of Gotham City. So the challenge is to come up with challenges for him, wild crimes, heist stories and robbery stories and kidnapping stories, all variety, whodunits. And you come up with these stories, and then you come up with your basic plot structure, and then you stick Batman in it and set him in motion. How is he going to react to a new villain in town who, uses dishware as his theme, or whatever, and that's the real challenge, is to not write a story about the character, but write a good story with the character in it, which always brings me back to Die Hard 3, the greatest Batman and Robin movie ever made. It's a great action, adventure, chase, mystery, heist story. And then they inserted the character of John McClane in it. They didn't just remake Die Hard. They came up with a whole new milieu for him, a whole new genre of the heist story with a tricky, brainy, chess-playing villain. And that's what makes it the best Batman and Robin movie ever made. It's an absolutely perfect Riddler movie. And movies is a good example. You'll see a movie, a sequel, and you're like, wow, that was a great sequel, or that sequel was a dud. And usually the dud sequels, I think in 100% of the cases, the dud sequels are about the character, not a good story with the character in it. It doesn't have anything we liked about the original film. It's just more of that character and exploring him more rather than or in place of a story. You think of good sequels like, Road Warrior as a sequel to Mad Max. It takes them to entirely different places, as well as the Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. It does explore the character, it expands on the character, but these are good, solid action stories with a character we're already familiar with inserted in them. And that's the way comics should be done. That's how you keep the stuff fresh, is by actually coming up with new stories. Matt Strott, my question for you, since you like Steve Ditko so much and seem like an objectivist, is have you ever read the works of Ayn Rand? If so, have you been influenced by her philosophy of objectivism, or would you consider yourself an objectivist? It doesn't come across in your writing, which is good because entertainment should be paramount in comics, but it certainly seems so in how you come across as a man, which is also good. Wow, you've thought a lot about this. Yeah, Ditko was an objectivist, very much a follower of the philosophy of Ayn Rand, in which there's no gray areas in life. And, you're either good or you're bad. And Ditko did not allow this to leak into his most famous creations, Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. He was writing pure escapist entertainment at this point, and I really can't find a lot of objectivism in these stories. His characters seem fully fleshed out, and that's the problem with objectivism. If you write it as fiction, is your characters tend to be one-dimensional, like Mr. A. I remember Mr. A when he first appeared. I thought he was fantastic. I just loved this character because he was unlike any comic book character I'd ever seen before, because he would just, in the very first story, he lets a character die because that character basically needs to suffer the consequences of the horrible things he's done. Mr. A shows absolutely no mercy for him in finest Ayn Rand fashion. And of course, Ayn Rand was an author, and she wrote a number of best-selling books that captured the public imagination and put forth in no uncertain terms her philosophy of objectivism, where we are all responsible for all of our own actions, and we pay the price. There are consequences to everything. But I kind of believe that. I'll go on about that a little bit more. I'm not really an objectivist. I'm aware of these books more than I've read them. I haven't really read them. I have read about Ayn Rand. I appreciate a lot of the thoughts that she had. I thought she was a very open-minded thinker for an objectivist. She came to her opinions on her own. I mean, no one taught this to her. But what I think anybody who's a creator owes to Ayn Rand, whether they believe in her philosophy or not, is she was very much proponent of the freedom of creators, particularly in the book The Fountainhead, in which our lead character is an architect who will not compromise. He will not compromise on his vision. He will not bend his skills to the wills of others when he believes that he is right about something. And her characters tend to be right all the time, which makes them kind of Mary Sue's, much like Mr. A is the toughest Mary Sue has ever been in a comic book. But, they're going to be right all the time. And I guess there's something cool about that. But you wouldn't want to read about these characters all the time. You wouldn't want every character to be an Ayn Rand character. But I do appreciate that she basically gave every creator, artist, writers, architects, anybody, the freedom to stand up for their own rights as an individual and as a creator. To defend your corner. Don't apologize for your work. Do what you think is best. Someone wrote recently, write like no one will read it. And you need that freedom as a creator, especially these days, where we live in an era that I don't even think Ayn Rand foresaw, where every word is examined for its negative impact on somebody out there, somebody who will be offended. And where our entire language is being turned upside down and edited and banned, or words you can't say anymore. I mean, they make actual lists of words you can't say, and it's things like barbecue. I mean, piggyback. What? Who are you offending? Swine? I don't get it. But anyway, yeah, I'm less an objectivist and more, I think, of a stoic. And I think I'm just a stoic by nature, not necessarily because I studied Epictetus, the granddaddy of Greek philosophers who came up with the idea of stoicism. And stoicism is that you basically approach life on your own terms, and you don't compromise. And I said to someone recently, I would rather like go into the woods and live in a cabin than compromise. I can walk away from it all. And I've done that in my life. I've just walked away from things that just weren't working. I took full responsibility for if I had messed them up. But when I was done with them, I was done with them. And no longer wanted to participate. And, a lot of times in comics in particular, I was asked to participate in projects that I didn't like, and I just simply refused. And Epictetus, in fact, never considered it, as Epictetus said once in the most famous story about him, that he would not even consider compromising his principles. And I think you kind of need that, because you're going to look back over your life and say, man, I really caved in that moment, and I shouldn't. And what would my life be like now if I hadn't? So, yeah, it's probably what's gotten me in more trouble than anything else is, I'm speaking my mind, and let the chips fall where they may. I'm not out to hurt anybody, but if I step all over your learned ideology, no apologies from me. Dan Battles. Afternoon, Mr. Dixon. I was wondering if you could talk about Archie Goodwin during one of your upcoming episodes, like this one. I just started reading volume 1 of the Creepy Archives from Dark Horse, and in the foreword, there's mention of how great a guy Archie was. What were your interactions with him like? Archie was famously the nicest guy in comics. There's a great story, and it's not an urban myth. It was told to me by people who were there. Both parties, actually. So Archie had Walt Simonson into the offices, and they were sitting in Archie's office talking because they were good friends, having created the revamped and rebooted Manhunter together. And some publicity flack at DC was giving a tour. It was either a press tour or fans. I don't know who she was touring through the building. And she pokes her head into Archie's office because the door was open. And all these, looky-loos poke their heads in too. And she introduces Walt Simonson first. And, oh, this is Walt Simonson, the nicest man in comics. Well, Archie bolts out of his chair and starts screaming at them. I'm the nicest guy in comics. I'm the nicest guy in comics. That was typical Archie. Very dry sense of humor, very funny guy. But he was. I mean, Walt's a hell of a nice guy, but Archie is still to this day the king of nice. And proof of that was he was a guy that you could approach at a convention back when editors went to conventions, and you could easily talk to him. He was open to talk to anybody. If I could make Archie laugh, that made my day. And so I would gravitate toward talking to Archie. First of all, he was very approachable. And secondly, I liked everything he did. I liked everything he wrote. I liked everything that he edited. I was a huge Archie fan, which I think he always suspected how much I idolized him, and just sort of shrugged it off. But he was great at joking with fans and stuff like that. And so I would talk to him at cons, which built up what I felt was a rapport. So I was able to call him, wherever he was working, and say, can I come in for an interview and pitch some stuff? And for years, I would visit Marvel, which is where he was most of that time, and pitch. And I wasn't ready for prime time. My stuff wasn't ready. It was ill-formed and stupid and derivative, and just not ready at all. But Archie never said that. He was never cruel, and he would sit and show me where I went wrong. And Archie could do that. He would read my pitches in front of me, which the first time freaked me out. Because it's whoa, I'm supposed to leave, and you're supposed to either throw these in the trash or read them later. But he would read them in front of me and then give me all this incredible criticism, good criticism, good constructive stuff about this is where you went wrong. You need to do this. If you move this scene to here, if you did this with this character, it would improve them. And this stuff was invaluable to me because it just sort of opened my eyes to what a writer does, how a writer thinks, because Archie was just, to me, the greatest comic book writer of them all. And still to this day, he's the greatest comic book writer, because you could literally sit him down in a room with a character he'd never seen before, and he could figure out a way into that character and figure out a fun, entertaining script. And, his stuff to me is legendary. I only wish he was more prolific. Archie actually didn't write all that much. I mean, there was never a time where he was doing 2 or 3 monthlies. But from the Warren magazines, which you mentioned, which my first intro to Archie, to his amazing run on Detective Comics as editor, and then on to just, like I said, just dropping him in on any character you can imagine. The Incredible Hulk 154 is one of my favorite comics ever. It is pure Archie. Hydra shrinks Hulk down to like the size of an action figure, thinking that they got him now, and he wakes up in their headquarters, and this very, very tiny Hulk goes around, basically kicking Hydra's ass for the rest of the story. And it's so pure Archie. And Archie told me that he had very little time to write this script. Stan was always dropping him into the deep end of the pool on things like, we need an Iron Man script like right now, like call Gene Colan and tell him this Iron Man script. But because, Archie had been to the wars and totally understood what a writer went through. And he was also, like most of us comic book writers, he at one time had wanted to be a comic book artist and was an accomplished cartoonist. He understood what artists went through as well. And so he was just a terrific guy to work with. And I wish I'd spent more time with him. I mean, I got to spend quite a bit of time with him when he was my editor on any number of Batman projects. He was my editor for a long time on Alien Legion. I would visit with him every time I went to DC, often going to lunch with him, and just generally having a good time with Archie. As Michael Higgins said at Archie's memorial, any time spent with Archie was a good time, because Michael, in his eulogy, Michael was a letterer and paste-up guy, a member of the bullpen at Marvel. He said that, he too regretted not having spent more time with Archie. But basically his eulogy was about that he will always treasure the time he did get to spend with him, even if it was just doing nothing, because he was just such a cool guy to be around. And a comics master, absolute comics master. I envy you reading those early Warren books for the first time. Brandon Medina. All the artists at CrossGen got better working in the same space. In what ways was it similar or different for the writers? Do you prefer to be around the writers or the artists? Well, it depends on the writer and it depends on the artist. We were assigned books, or we came up with our own books, or whatever we did at CrossGen, and your team was put together, and your penciler, your inker, your colorist, and then of course the letterer, if you needed. There were 2 company letterers, and you'd have regular meetings with them. So you're sort of thrown in. You would also have even more regular meetings with the writers. We would have weekly lunches, where the writers would go over the outline or schedule or coming event or whatever. So I think we all played nice. We all had our own corner to cover, and but writers are a cowardly and suspicious lot. If you get a bunch of writers together in a room, they'll talk about anything but writing. I remember once at a Chicago convention, a whole bunch of us went for dinner at Giordano's, big pizza place near the convention center. And it was like a huge entourage, maybe 20 people. And all the basically the pros sat at one table, and then there was like this kiddie table of people that we all knew who were like part of our entourage or part of our ensemble. And a lot of these guys went on to become, comic pros themselves, but they weren't there yet at this point. And I remember after dinner, one of them said to me, "Wow, we all wanted to be sitting at that table. To hear the fantastic stories you were telling about working in comics." And I said, "We talked about mortgage rates." Yes. Comic writers don't like talking to each other because they're aware that, this guy might steal one of my ideas. And as a writer, we all know that you can steal an idea without meaning to. You can hear a great idea and 2 weeks later completely forget where you heard it and think you thought of it yourself. And then, of course, there are writers who will simply steal from you. There are even writers who will simply ask, "Do you have any good ideas do you have any plots you can give me for my book?" And I'm talking about top talent. I've run into top writing talents who said, "If you ever come up with an idea for one of my books, please let me know." Because they were, getting to the point where they'd be bereft of new plot lines. So it's, the thing about working CrossGen is that every writer wrote differently. The guy I was most simpatico with was Tony Bedard. Tony had the office next to me, and Tony wrote in much the same way I did. He thought of the big scene, wrote the thing around it, was conscious of putting humor in. Tony and I write very similarly, and I would go by his office and see him, staring at his screen, either staring at his screen or typing away furiously. And I'm sure there were many times you walked by my office and saw me doing the same thing. And I never saw the other writers really doing that. So I'm not sure how they turned out their work. I know Ron Mars had an entirely different way of approaching his work than either Tony or I did. And Barbara Kiesel was the other in-house writer. And she always wrote with the door closed. So I don't know what was going on in there. I don't know, if she was climbing the walls or if it was just, flowing from her fingertips effortlessly. I have no idea. So, but Tony and I think were the most alike. And therefore we had an easier time talking to each other. I remember a long car ride with Ron Mars one time in which 2 of us barely said a word to each other. And it wasn't because we were mad at each other. It's just because it's 2 writers. It's like 2 hamsters in a cage that's too small. So writers are an odd bunch. Artists are easier to hang out with because, they're generally more affable. Writers get cranky. they were more interested in talking about, movies and TV shows and, or telling stories from their personal life. Jeff Johnson on Way of the Rat in particular had stories of his own life experiences. That he was one of those rare guys where we would go, yeah, tell us about that again. He'd go, oh, you guys don't want to hear that story. Yeah. And there was like a dozen guys crowded around to hear the same story for like the 10th time. Because Jeff was such a good storyteller, and the stuff that happened to him was so amazing. It was like a bunch of kids at bedtime, tell us a story, tell us a story. So that kind of stuff was fun, and you can't recreate that working remotely, that kind of camaraderie and sharing. I made a lot of good friends at CrossGen, and they continue to be friends and continue even to work with some of them. And it was a good time had by all. But yeah, it was a different experience having to hang with writers. But, generally it was good. I mean, I've had bad times hanging with writers, but this was good. And we saw each other a lot. Saw each other every day, going to lunch, going to social functions, and all the rest of it. Because of the way CrossGen was run with the Big Uber story, we were always having meetings about the Big Uber story, which I generally was silent throughout because I hated the Big Uber story. But, I participated as much as I could. So, Gentle Savage asks, do you have any thoughts on the rise of AI art? Is it something you'd ever consider messing around with? And also, do you have any thoughts on the writer's strike happening in Hollywood right now? Well, strangely enough, I see these two questions as about the same thing. AI is the end of our culture as we know it. And people go, well, it'll be here in a few years. No, it's here now. And it's only going to get more here, if that makes any sense. As this thing, it doesn't learn, but as it assimilates more knowledge. It doesn't learn because it's a stupid machine. It's a stupid program. As it assimilates more knowledge, as its reach reaches further out and out, into whatever, to steal material from everywhere that's available to it, and everything is not available. The sum of human knowledge is not on the internet, my friends. It's not even in all the servers of the world. But the AI believes this to be so, and the creators of AI, who for whatever reason want to create this digital demagogue, they're out to end our culture because I keep hearing idiotic arguments, and they are idiotic. I mean, somebody recently said, I was complaining about AI, and somebody said, well, they said the same thing about the printing press. Okay, who said the same thing about the printing press? And if they didn't like the printing press, how do we know what they said? It's like the dumbest argument ever. What did they say about the printing press? No, they're saying about AI what they said about the telegram and the telephone. That's going to make our lives better. When the telegraph was invented, its purveyors promised that it would be the end of war because it would be the end of misunderstanding. And this same promise was used to sell us the telephone. It was used to sell us the internet. It was used to sell us the fax machine and texting and all the rest. And all of it's a lie. And AI is a lie because they've taught AI how to lie. AI has a bias. AI is dangerous. AI will not only be producing the fiction you read and the movies and TV you see and the comic art you see, it'll also be producing news stories that have no basis in fact. And this has already happened. They have used AI to create news stories, and the AI just searches around and cobbles together something that sounds absolutely convincing, absolutely real, and none of it is true. And it's because, we become so uneducated or disinterested in what's going on around us. AI is going to play us for fools at every turn and already has. And that kind of brings us to the writer's strike. This is the absolute worst time for the writers to go on strike. They should have gone on strike years ago for a number of different reasons, and they should have gone on strike ahead of this AI thing, which they've been talking about for years. They should have come out against AI from the beginning, and joined Elon Musk in his insistence that AI have an off switch, that there be a way to turn the AI off. But like every union, the union is really not about its members. It's about itself. And they don't want to piss off the gatekeepers in Hollywood. And trust me, the gatekeepers in Hollywood are all about AI. Same for comics, same for anybody. I mean, a fiction publisher to me recently confessed. I don't even know if he confessed. Because confession implies a degree of shame. Confessed that they were looking into AI, basically to produce fiction, and possibly comic books. That horrifies me as a comic book writer, as a creator, and it scares me for all of the creators out there, that they're going to be out of a job because AI, as it becomes more skilled, as it assimilates more imagery and more material or content, it will be a competitor. It will never be as good, but when did anybody ever care about that who's in the gatekeeping business? The other reason it's a terrible time to strike is because it's a terrible time in Hollywood. Most of the major studios are deep in debt. You don't slaughter the hog when it's thin. You slaughter the hog when it's fat. So you go on strike when all the money's there, and all the money was there when the streaming services exploded. When the streaming services were dying, starving for content, and everything was blowing up, and everybody wanted stuff. We want story. And the money was there. A subscription. People were subscribing to these things. They were going nuts. People were subscribing to 4 and 5 and 6 streaming services at one time. And then they woke up and thought, what am I doing? When's the last time I watched anything on Apple TV? So I'm canceling my subscription and wait till they have something good. And of course, Disney, doing everything it can to shoot itself in the head, has lost millions of subscribers, which means the money they laid out for content, which is second only to Netflix, is now in jeopardy because they produce material that millions of people decided they don't want to watch. And they're gone. And I think a lot of the Disney subscribers are gone for good. They're not waiting until Disney gets something they want to see. They're just disgusted with Disney and they're out of there, particularly parents with children who don't want their kids watching the material on Disney Plus, the open political propaganda that is so much a part of Disney Plus, and they don't want their kids watching it. And you know what happens when that happens is those kids grow up, they grow out of Disney Plus, and the parents never resubscribe because those kids are gone. And the thing is, you know how it is. You subscribe to one of these services, you have it, kind of forget about it, and then you come upon a day where you realize, man, I haven't looked at Netflix in the longest time. I haven't watched anything on Netflix, and there ain't nothing on there I want to see right now, so let me ditch Netflix. You're not getting my $16.95 a month anymore till you put on something I like. So yeah, it's an absolutely terrible time to be on strike. And I've had people say, well, they went on strike over the streaming revenues back in 2007. And I'm like, yeah, well, 2007, that's great. But in, I believe it was 2013, Netflix began making their own new material. And that was a huge change to the entertainment business, because now streaming wasn't just going to be old TV shows and old movies. It was going to be new stuff like destination TV, like must-see TV, without the confines of the FCC or even cable regulations. And so the streaming services could go wild. And I was there. I was there at the moment, at the time. It was one of those rare things where you're at a place and it turns out it's historic. I was at a broadcasting convention in Miami when it was announced that Netflix was going to start creating its own content, starting with House of Cards. And it was like Day of the Locust. Everybody's heads exploded. They didn't foresee this. No one foresaw this. The streaming services would make enough money to make their own content. And what a lot of them didn't realize, and I realized early on, and I got to meet the woman who was head of programming at the time, and this woman looked like a deer caught in the headlights. Everywhere she went, she was in a receiving line as if she was royalty. She was stopped and people were shaking her hands, asking her questions, and she just looked like, what did I take on? What is this all about? Because she wasn't an entertainment person. She wasn't a Hollywood person. She was just an exec at the company who was now going to be in charge of their new programming. And what a lot of people didn't see was, well, we can all start creating content. Yes, but what's the difference between Netflix and, say, HBO or one of the networks? Netflix has the numbers, the real numbers, not ratings, but they actually have the actual moment-by-moment, second-by-second viewership of all of their subscribers to their streaming service. So they can put together algorithms, and these are accurate algorithms, of who's popular and who is not. And they found that House of Cards, the British television show, was the most watched and most liked thing they had on their streaming service. And then they looked for actors to cast in it, and they looked, well, a lot of people, and this was years ago, obviously, a lot of our viewers, a lot of our subscribers really like Kevin Costner, and he's not that expensive. So they cobbled together a product that was literally computer programmed to be popular. And that was Netflix's model for a long time until the wheels came off and Hollywood got involved in Netflix. The Hollywood forced Netflix into a Hollywood model of, risk aversion and everything else based on nothing but, gut feelings. Bad way to go. But this is when they should have struck. This is when the writer's strike should have happened, or they should have made their demands. It's like, if you're going to be creating new content, we want a bigger piece of that new content. We want to be at the table, as it were, striking deals, because everybody knew that if this was successful for Netflix, and laughably there was some question, well, will this work out for them? What are you, stupid? Of course it's going to work out for them. They're going to get new subscribers because that's what they're all about. And so Hollywood got their heads around the fact that you could have a streaming service tentpole feature. You could have a streaming service. I mean, Will Smith's first movie for Netflix brought in 15 million new subscribers. Now that's, at the time, that was $10 a month. And if even 5% of them keep their subscription, that was like one of the most profitable movies ever made, because that's $10 a month every month for a year. That's, that's a lot of money. I can't do the math in my head, but that's Hollywood summer blockbuster money. That's Star Wars movie money for this silly Will Smith feature, which probably cost $150 million to make, but they got all that back. Well, that ain't happening anymore because they've overextended themselves. There's too much competition in this arena, and everybody's dialing back. The studios are dialing back. The streaming services are dialing back. And if you need any other proof of the streaming services dialing back, I think I've mentioned this before in videos. There's never been more horror movies in production from the major studios right now than there are right now. And that is a leading indicator of the studios cutting back, because you can make a horror film for about $5 million that you are pretty certain will do $60 million box office, and possibly more. So every studio has more. Never before have there been as many horror movies, because horror movies are easy money. It's just a given that they're going to make cash, and that's the strongest indicator that Hollywood is in trouble financially, and they are. Paramount, Warner's, Disney, all billions of dollars in debt. Billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars in debt, and there's really no way out for them, because they keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And the accountants have come forward to right the ship. At Warner's are trying to right the ship, but the more they try to right it, the more they find how much water the ship has taken on. To torture the analogy further, the more they try to fix Warner's, the more debt they find. And then Paramount in serious trouble financially, despite the hits they have. And then they seem to double down on stupid by doing more and more woke projects, more and more projects people don't like, expanding and spinning off on things that nobody wants to see, hiring talent no one's interested in anymore. I mean, you can't run a multinational streaming service, TV studio and movie studio simply on everything Taylor Sheridan can think of. They should be building on that. They should be looking for another Taylor Sheridan, but they're not. Anyway, different subject. But AI plays into all of this. And AI is going to make everything that the writers are striking about irrelevant, because the studios, publishers, everywhere, trust me, you have read web content written by an AI. And the studios are already looking at hiring writers simply to rewrite what the AI has done. And when you think about it, the producers have been using AI for years, even though it's under a different name. They use these programs, these screenplay programs that will help you, quote, I'm doing air quotes, quote unquote, correct your script or suggest scenes or say, well, this screenplay needs this, or you need to cut that. No, a computer doesn't know what you need to cut. That's why we have stupid, unsurprising, unchallenging movies now. But these totally forgettable CGI monstrosities that you walk out of the theater and there's nothing to talk about at dinner because the movie was so unremarkable. And yet you have this feeling that you enjoyed it while you were watching it, but it's a hollow feeling. And AI is only going to multiply that, because these producers have been using these programs, or insisting screenwriters use these programs, or using these programs to inform themselves about writing something they know nothing about, in order to create these, these forgettable, oatmeal movies. I mean, just, yeah, they're kind of filling, but then it's over, and I really don't want that again. So cold oatmeal. So yeah, AI, huge danger. Resist it at every step of the way. We must fight this as a culture. And writer's strike, boy, you guys missed the boat. You missed your cue, and now it's too late. And now you've basically struck at a time where you're going to remind the producers and studios that they really don't need you all that much. And I've already heard that some of the studios are using the strike as a means to cancel a number of writers' contracts. So it's already in motion. You're going to make the writers irrelevant. Hollywood studios have always hated their writers, and now they're going to be able to put that hatred into action. Hey, sometimes there's questions I don't answer. And you write them, I get them over and over and over again. And it'll be like, Chuck, what do you think of Joe Slobotnik's run on Captain Potato Salad? I was like, okay, well, I didn't like Joe Slobotnik's run on Captain Potato Salad, but I'm not about to share that with you. Hey, what do you think about that new series, Fabulous Man? I didn't watch it. And I don't intend to. I recently had someone give me a deadline that I had to see the new Guardians of the Galaxy movie so that I could talk about it. And it's very nice that you invited me on your podcast to talk about the new Guardians of the Galaxy movie, but I probably won't see it for months. I'll see it when it comes on Blu-ray, if at all. So I get that a lot. Now, I don't want to say, don't say, hey, Chuck, what do you think about this? Hey, Chuck, what do you think about that? Because a lot of times it'll be things that I liked or enjoyed or have something to tell you about. But I'm not going to, as I think often these questions do, they propose something they know I'll dislike, and then they'll have the fun of listening to me trash it on this channel. And I'm really not here. I know a lot of people, make their hay doing that, but I'm really not here to explore things I don't like. As simple as that. I don't really enjoy jumping up and down on some other creator's creation, no matter how much I might loathe it, especially publicly, because that to me is not fun. I'd probably have 10,000 listeners if I did that every week. Chuck trashes this guy, trashes this woman. This comic goes, into the thresher with into the wood chipper with Chuck pushing it down. I really don't want to do that. But don't hesitate to ask me these questions, but don't be surprised if I don't answer them. So if I don't answer your question, hey, Chuck, what do you think of this? It means I either don't know anything about it, have no opinion, or really didn't like it. So there you go. If you have any of those kind of questions or any other kind of questions or pictures of your doggies or kitties or whatever, send it to brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com. It's the most reliable way to reach me. You can ask me questions below in the comment section here. You can go on Facebook, you can go on Twitter, and ask questions there, but I might miss them. But I never miss questions, even the ones I don't answer, on brunobookstore@gmail.com. And by the way, if I haven't answered your question, I have no animosity towards you. It's just I get a lot of emails, and I can't directly answer all of them. I try, but if I don't answer your question on this channel, no matter how many times you've asked it, I'm not ignoring you. It's just I don't have anything to say about that subject. To make that absolutely clear. What I do have to say is, before I say goodbye, Siege of the Black Citadel from Arkhaven Comics. It is available at Amazon. It is available at Arkhaven, Barnes & Noble. It is the first of a planned trilogy of Conan novels. I've already completed the second one. I am well past the halfway point on the third. And I appreciate you checking it out. If you buy it directly from Arkhaven, in addition to the paperback, you get a free ebook. How about that? There's a deal for you. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And I'll see you all down the road.